Welcome everyone to another edition of Drunk Agile. With me as always, unfortunately, Prateek Singh. But fortunately, we get Prateek. We usually get Nisha. Hey, Nisha. She's in the middle of a bath there. Good to see you, Nisha. Thanks for joining us. And welcome to all of you. We are so glad you are here. By the way, not to give away, because we're not supposed to date these things and not to tell you when we're recording them, but happy St. Andrew's Day. Happy St. Andrew's Day, which is a nice segue into Prateek. What are you drinking today?
I had to finish the Blair Athol. It was at it, and
had to put it out of its misery.
Yeah. Had to put it, which also means it's slightly heavier pour than usual, which means it's going to be a better podcast.
It's going to be a great episode. Great episode. Surprise, surprise! I'm drinking the exact same Blair Athol. I think I found it first, and then you went and bought it, and then I bought it after you. I think that was the order.
Well,
anyway. It's great stuff. If no one's ever had a Blair Athol before, highly, well, this particular one anyway, highly recommend. Just so everybody knows, we do pay attention to the comments and the questions that we get from our listeners. So thank you as always for posting those. We love the interaction and we love to get your feedback. The one question, well, I mean, we kind of threw some darts or picked at random, whatever. The one question we came up tonight, because I think that it kind of follows on nicely from some of the previous episodes that we've done, is this whole idea of dependency management versus dependency elimination. We've talked about that a few times, and I think we've given some hints, not even some hints. I think we even directly talked about some ways to to handle the two or to think about the two. But we had a follow-on question, so Prateek, why don't you start us off? Dependency management versus dependency elimination. Tell us what you think.
We're going a little out of order. We didn't.
Oh,
cheers!
Lunch, everybody.
Can't start talking without the whiskey.
Fair. That's fair. Thank you for calling me.
Yeah. This problem usually comes up more when we're talking about scaled methods of scaling and multiple teams involved or external vendors involved. We need to figure out how things are going to get done when there are all these dependencies going across. And that automatically leads people down the path of, well, if there are all these dependencies, we need to know about them up front so that we can sequence things in a way so that dependencies are not a problem anymore. And you can see how that's a logical way of thinking about it. It's like, if there are some things that could potentially be a problem, let's manage them so that they are no longer a problem. We've kind of already given away the punchline, I think. But if in our world, the way to make dependencies not a problem anymore is to get rid of them. Not necessarily to manage them, but to get rid of them. And let's talk a little bit about why we would prefer eliminating those dependencies rather than managing them.
If we can, I want to take a step back, because you did mention that, hey, logically, what you just said, logically it kind of makes sense. Yeah. I mean, maybe even intuitively, although I personally might argue with both of those things. But I think, as always, we kind of have to list some assumptions that are baked into this idea. If we can know dependencies up front, that means we can sequence our work in such a way as to minimize the impact of, or maybe potentially even eliminate the impact of those dependencies, right? Yep. So the biggest assumption, and we were just talking about this, I think it was our very first call this morning. The biggest fallacy out there is that the order in which you start stuff is exactly the same as the order in which it will finish. Can you say some more about why? I mean, this should make sense to everybody, but why is that not true? Why is the order in which you start things not the same as the order in which things finish? Why is that?
Yeah, this is the first counterintuitive part of this, right? And then I think we're going to hit on multiple counterintuitive things here. You could start a whole bunch of work all at the same time. The order in which that work finishes, though, is dependent on a couple of things. One, how much you're focused on each of those pieces of work, and two, the size of each of those work, the amount of time those things will take. And hopefully that is pretty obvious. If you're running a mile versus running 100 meters, you've got two people starting at the same time, the person running the mile will take longer. Um, well, yeah, depends on who's running.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, that's actually a deeper statement than I think maybe most people, than what you intended, for sure.
I did. I definitely
realize.
Yeah, depends on who's running. Depends on whether the person running the 100 meters pulls the hamstring right in the middle of it. All those things that could happen. But
maybe barricades are popping up. Maybe there's a huge hole in the track that the person falls into. Maybe, whatever.
Exactly.
It's
and that's so it's not necessarily true that the order in which you start is the order in which you finish. In fact, the more things you work on at the same time, the order in which you start work, or the priority order you think the work has, becomes less and less important. The size of the work becomes more and more important. For reference, I don't remember the episode number, but please look up the Feature Monte Carlo episode of Drunk Agile.
Yeah. One thing I thought you were gonna bring up, the irony of that too, the order in which stuff starts is not the same as the order in which it's finished. The irony of that as well is you might start something and uncover a whole bunch of hidden dependencies, which is what you were trying to manage to begin with, but you just didn't know about them, and which is a legitimate thing. I mean, that happens all the time, right? Mm-hmm. And so, that's, to me, that's kind of poetic justice, if that's really what you're suffering from. Not to make light of people suffering out there trying to manage dependencies or whatever. So, okay, so that's one big assumption that's baked into that. People assume the order in which we start stuff is the order that we're going to finish stuff, so we can line stuff up in like a Gantt chart type of way, and all these dependencies are going to go away. Are there any other assumptions that we need to mention about, logically ordering stuff? I guess you did hit on the other one is, independent of any dependencies, the amount of things that you're working on, becomes the biggest determinant. It's not order that becomes a determinant of, how things finish. It's how many other things you're working on. So those are kind of two big things. Anything else that we're missing here that I think that we need to kind of jump into that?
Not really.
Okay. All right.
I can't think of any right now.
Well,
more whiskey will bring more thoughts.
As we drink. Okay, so we've got that. So so there's that one assumption. Hopefully that's enough to get you out of this way of thinking of, we can manage dependencies by priority, by ordering, by whatever. Okay, so now let's get into the next point I think that you wanted to make. Sorry for that kind of digression. The next point that you wanted to make is why then, so why elimination over management, and what are some things that we can do to eliminate dependencies?
Yeah, and again, why one of the things that you mentioned actually goes directly into this. Most dependencies are uncovered when you do the work. They're not necessarily discovered up front. It's as a recovering developer, I know that as I go into something, that's when I realize that, oh, Firebase does not support that. What do I need to do? I thought it would be super easy. I could just run with this. Or this version of Node deprecated that thing that I used to use. What do I do now? Those things actually pop up more often than are known in advance. What we were talking about earlier about sequencing things so that we can handle known dependencies, that is a problem, because you cannot really sequence things with any decent amount of confidence if you have high WIP. But unknown dependencies, it doesn't matter how much we talk about this stuff, unknown dependencies are going to pop up. They just are going to show up.
Yep. Yep. And this is, I mean, kind of feeding into all of this, and this is something that we did an episode, at least one episode, we might have done 2 episodes on this, is this idea coming from Agile frameworks that you have to have small teams, right? You have to have, team sizes that are 10 or less or whatever, pick whatever that number it is. And so not only are you having to deal with everything that Prateek just talked about, but then you've potentially introduced a whole bunch of dependencies yourself because you've arbitrarily, take a drink, because you've arbitrarily split teams, based on some guidance that is completely independent of context or complexity or whatever.
Yeah, so we've talked about known dependencies, which ordering and team size both play into. Talked about unknown dependencies, which you can't uncover anyway. But does that still mean that we shouldn't like sit down and spend about 3 to 4 days with all the teams to figure out where these dependencies are? And what's the problem with that? Why not actually try to manage them? If we know dependencies are going to be there, why not spend time managing them? What's the problem with that?
Well, and more importantly, take all those teams offline for 2 full days and map out those dependencies for the next quarter, right? Why don't we do that?
Not to say anything about the pre-planning meeting.
Yeah. So I'm happy to listen to you because why? I mean, I assume you're going to get into like the problems of probabilistic forecasting and things like that at some point, right? So, but yeah, let's take a step. Take a step.
So this is where the issues start, right? This is where when we talk about these planning meetings, or these pre-planning meetings, when we're trying to figure out how these things line up and how the amount of time we are spending on this, and as Dan said, taking the entire team offline and the amount of time the team's spending on all that time, we're not actually doing work. We're just talking about work. There's a great opportunity cost. Like if you do rough math on this and go, okay, let's say I have a 200 people organization and I'm going to take them offline for 2 to 3 days every quarter. That's about 2 weeks of work for the entire organization out of the window, right up front, doing something that we know, as we were talking about, could actually end up being wrong. Doing all this dependency management work, which we have the right intentions. We want to figure out how to get work through. But doing all of this work, which we know because of probabilistic forecasting, probabilistic nature of the word, not probabilistic forecasting, probabilistic nature of the word, the high whip situations we were talking about, the emergent dependencies we were talking about, it's going to be wrong anyway.
I think that's the key point, and I want to make sure we pause and kind of stress that. So maybe this is another assumption that we kind of mentioned, but we didn't really. Even if you know all of this stuff, even if you think that you know it, let me say it this way. If you think that you know it, your chances of being wrong are much, much, much higher than your chances of being right in that case. In fact, it's what it quickly, and maybe you'll get into this here in a second, it quickly approaches zero. Your chances of being right quickly approach zero the more of those dependencies that you have. I don't know, should we go there right now first?
Yeah, let's go there, because I think we'll need to move on from it very quickly because there's too much math on that.
Yeah.
I'm gonna make a few assumptions. Let's assume you're planning using averages. Just that, so that it makes it easier. We're gonna make another assumption that your data is distributed normally. 2 huge assumptions there. So we're using averages and data is distributed normally, which means, or something that's kind of looks like normal, which means your average result is about at that 50th percentile. It lines up with the median. which means you have about a 50% chance of being right with any one forecast. Now you start lining up dependencies that, oh, this one finishes, then this one goes, then this one goes. Very quickly, even with 2, it's 0.5 times 0.5, we're down to 25% chance. You add another one, that's 12.5. You add another one, you're less than 10%, close to 5% likely. You keep doing that, you keep lining these things up, whether they're dependent or not, by the way, because many a times because of dependencies, you're not starting other stuff. You keep lining these things up, very quickly you're approaching 0. Within 3 or 4 of these things lined up against each other, you're close to 0, much closer to 0 than to 50 or 100.
And that 50%, that's fairly optimistic. I mean, really, your chances of being right are probably more like 10%. So start doing the math if you're for each one of those of making sure that you've identified the dependency and they've lined up. Let's say you've only got a 10% chance of that being right. How many of those do you need to quickly get to 0? We'll leave that as math for the reader. But...
Well, here's the thing, even if you're doing the things that we talk about and you're taking an 85th percentile thing, within 3 of them, you're close to 50 again. Within 3 things lined up, you're close to 50. And you've all those beautiful, great things we talk about with probabilistic forecasting, you've thrown them all away because you're lining up dependency.
Okay, yeah. So hopefully we've made the case. I don't know. I feel like we've made the case that dependency management. Anybody who comes in and says you need to manage dependencies, they're making the mistake of all these assumptions that we've just talked about, and they're solving the wrong problem because they're setting you up for failure rather than setting you up for success. So let's talk about what are some things that we can do to set you up for success. And this is to me where the dependency elimination talk comes in. So what are some things that we can do around the dependency elimination? How do we get rid of these things?
Yeah, that's the part where we allow, and this is going to sound so weird for most people, we allow these dependencies to emerge, and when they emerge, we actually attack them. We actually go, okay, this thing happened, and it is, or it's happened 4 times now. What is it that we need to do? Is this internal, that team A is always dependent on team B? Is there a way to bring the skills that are on team B onto team A? Is there a way to combine these teams? Is there another way to resolve this thing so that we don't have to manage this ever in the future? Just eliminate this. So that's one thing. And if it's an external dependency that we keep waiting on this vendor, hey, can we build this thing in-house? Can we switch vendors? Can we do something else which does not make us be dependent on this vendor all the time that takes 2-3 months to resolve? Essentially taking steps to make sure that this thing doesn't happen again, rather than figuring out, oh, this thing might happen and that thing might happen, and how do we do the mitigation of the risk rather than the elimination of the risk?
Yeah, quick example. I mean, I know this is obvious, but just a quick example of this. I worked with a company that shall remain nameless. I can't say the name, but it's enough to say that it was highly regulated, highly regulated. And so anything that we wanted to do, essentially just anything that we wanted to do, release into production, had to have legal approval. It just had to, because otherwise we would be potentially in violation of certain regulatory standards. And so what would happen is, our software teams would go off and they'd build all these features, and we'd be ready to release, and then have to send everything off to legal, and it would go into some big black hole for legal, and God knows when that stuff would come back. Finally, after a while, as we were able to gather the data and explain to people, look, this is the impact to our cycle time. When this stuff is heading out, this is one of the things we did. I know it sounds obvious, but it's really, really hard for organizations to do this, was to just get legal representation on the team. We got somebody from the legal department to be on our team, to be who could speak to some of these regulatory requirements and or sign off on the fact that yes, these regulatory requirements had been met. And so maybe this is maybe a future Drunk Agile episode, because the ultimate punchline of this is, if you really care about flow, yes, we need to limit work in progress. Yes, we need to pay attention to this. Yes, we need to do all of that stuff. But fundamentally, what we really need to do is design our organization around what that flow is. And so that means potentially bigger team sizes. That means, maybe not teams lined up for specific products. That means not teams, with specializations like, hey, this is the legal team and this is a finance team and this is a whatever, right? If what you really care about is flow, philosophically, that means you are going to have to redesign your organization. Anyway, that's a completely different. We don't want to go there just yet, unless you.
We don't. Okay.
Well, I mean, you can. We can do whatever we want. It's our podcast.
What? Okay. Again, one thing I wanted to mention, because you put the thought in my head. Usually, the design of your organization determines how things flow to your customers.
It's like kind of a Conway's law, right? Kind of.
Yeah. It's like it's the way your organization is organized is what determines how value flows to customers. It actually, it should be the other way. We need to think about it in the exact opposite way. The optimal way to flow value to customers should determine how our organization is actually, quote unquote, organized.
Okay. Any other thoughts? I mean, what else can we do for dependency? So there are bigger teams. There are making sure that to Scrum's credit, they actually say this in the Scrum guide. They're like, if you have a Scrum team, you need to have, all the skills on that team to be able to deliver. Mm-hmm. But then, like, almost the very next sentence, I know it's not this next sentence, but I'm just going to say it the way. Almost the very next sentence, they say, but your team has to be 10 people. They don't say it has to be, but their strong recommendation is it has to be. So it's like, because we talked about Prateek was on a team that was, I don't know, how big did it get? 40, 50?
Yeah, 30, 35 to 40, something that range.
Mine was over 60. At some point, it may mean that your teams need to be that big, and guess what? That's okay. You can still be agile, if your teams are that big. Okay, so bigger teams, making sure you've got the right skill sets on, potentially, redesigning your org structure. Any other fundamental things for dependency elimination? What are we talking about?
And Dan, kind of you kind of mentioned this already. Is your secret key to all of this are the flow metrics. The way you were able to make the argument that we need legal representation on that team is, hey, this is what it's doing to our cycle time. Things that should take 3 days are taking 200 days because we're waiting on this. Cycle time is a great way to make that case, but it turns out cycle time only after you've already finished something. So anytime we've talked about aging, you've heard us say this, the best way to find out which dependencies we need to eliminate is figuring out which dependencies are causing your work items to age. If your work item is aging in a way that you don't expect it to, you thought we could do this thing in 3 days, and it's already 10 days, well, there's probably some dependency. Let's get rid of it. Let's figure out what we need to do to get rid of it. That your flow metrics are going to help you with this, in particular, cycle time and aging. We'd prefer you look at aging.
We are all over the place on this one. Can you tell we haven't done this for a while? We're kind of out of practice here. Apologize for being all over the place. But as part of that, what Prateek's talking about, to me, the reason the flow metrics are so important is because I believe the next great evolution of this stuff is being able to put, if you can't already, being able to put a dollar value on that cycle time. And I worked with a gentleman at a previous company. We should get him on this, where he actually did that. He worked in the office of the CFO, and he actually did. He went and he put a hard dollar number on a day of cycle time, and he was able to prove, hey, for each day of cycle time that this feature does not get released, it's costing us this amount of money. I think if we can start talking to senior management executives in that way, that's the language that they understand. They don't care about story points. They don't care about PI planning. They don't care about small team sizes. They don't care about any of that stuff. They care about, hey, when's this thing going out the door, and how much is it going to cost me? That's what they care about. So
yeah,
being able to translate cycle time into dollars. Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
And no, I was just going to carry that on, saying when something starts to hurt your pocket, the way to deal with it is eliminating.
Mhm.
So if dependencies are causing cycle time to go up, that dollar value to keep going up, well, the way we deal with that is eliminate it. Let's figure out, do we need to redesign our org? Do we need to switch vendors? Do we need to do any of the things that we talked about in order to make sure we don't invest too much money before we ship something?
I don't know. I feel like maybe we probably should get out of this, before we
Yeah,
confuse people
we should. Yeah,
anymore.
yeah.
For those of you who are interested in dependency elimination, dependency management, let us know if any of this has resonated with you. Are there further questions? We, as you can tell, we could talk for hours and hours and hours on this stuff and probably not say anything meaningful. So if you want to hear a little bit more, just as many people do, please leave us a comment, send us an email, whatever. We'd love to hear from you. On that note, Prateek, any final word on this to wrap us up?
Yeah, don't spend time and money managing your dependencies. Spend that effort in actually eliminating them so you don't have to manage them.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So for the star of the show, Nisha, who has she moved? She has not.
Yep. Just changed positions, but not moved.
Yeah, yep. For Nisha, for Prateek, my name is Daniel Vacanti. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you in the next episode. Thanks, everyone.